Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company. Welcome and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email me, tmosso@the1916company.com for purchase pricing and availability questions regarding this watch. Today, we are discussing a timepiece that launched in 2003 and, according to Journe's own records, was produced as you see it here through 2005. So this is the FP Journe Octa Lune. It is an automatic with a 5-day power reserve and a moon phase. If you're wondering what is the difference between this and the Octa Divine, the main difference is going to be where the hands are mounted, subdials here versus center mounted for the Divine. But I think when people envision an FP Journe watch in their mind, something almost exactly like this arises from the imagination. Platinum case, yellow gold dial, dial side hardware, polished steel bezel around a subdial with complications, and of course he invented and made it. This is an incredibly romantic Eleanor case made in France, early 1300 caliber, and it is brass movement Journe, 38 millimeters in diameter. This watch is beautifully sized, 44.7 lug tip to lug tip, 10.5 thick, with a 20 millimeter spacing in between the lugs. And what's fascinating here is that the watch has a lot of personality despite not being big. A man can wear it, a woman can wear it. I can tell you my wrist is 16 centimeters circumference. Here's the down the barrel angle that I find to be the truest one. A wrist as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference can wear this, and it'll play nice with a cuff as it's not too thick and it has a domed bezel, so it'll slide underneath the sleeve. Here's your over-the-top shot. Here's your cuff shot one more time. It's equipped with a modern Journe strap, and I mention that just because every once in a while you do see an honest-to-God mid-2000s survivor. This is what Journe fits on his watches today. So it's a large rectangular scale, symmetrical scale, alligator leather on the top of the line cut of the animal. Black matte, a little bit of bolstering, give it volume, monotone stitching, a folded edge, and then small round scale alligator on the bottom. The older straps would have had calfskin on the bottom, but gator on the bottom makes a more expensive but much longer lasting strap, and this watch deserves the best. You can also see that a curved spring bar is used because one characteristic of Journe cases is that they tend to be drilled very close to the case, and that is to try to bring the pivot centers of the strap as close to the center as possible to fit better on a small wrist. One consequence if you don't use a curved spring bar is that there can be an impediment to the motion of the strap, so there's absolutely no conflict between the strap here and the case because a curved spring bar is used, so that's the thinking there. We have a buckle. As you can see, back in the old days, things were done differently, with hallmarking on the inner face of the buckle itself. It's an unusual look, but then again, Journe did things a little bit differently when it came to case, bracelet, and buckle hardware. First, the design. The case is absolutely iconic. Although it's a fairly standard blended lug Calatrava style, Journe manages to create a very signature aesthetic via the use of the domed bezel and case back, their overlapping flanges defining the mid-case, this turn of the lugs almost 90 degrees from the horizontal of the center, and then a crown that's not branded but instantly recognizable. The double dimples and the knurling, you know that's Journe. And of course, Journe uses an unsigned crown, largely because of all his horological heroes existing in an age when it was uncommon to sign a crown. So if you go back to the early 19th and the entirety of the 18th century, generally you weren't seeing a lot of branded crowns back then. Now, the watch was 30 meters water resistant when originally made. I would recommend you not test that theory today. So, long before solid gold movements, Journe used solid gold dials. What we've got here is a media blasted yellow gold dial, and this sort of like sunny side up aesthetic with a platinum case and then a yellow gold dial is really what I think of when I envision an FP Journe watch. So for a lot of folks, this is going to be worth the price of admission on the base of its iconic qualities, which it definitely has. Other iconic qualities, well, those hands are instantly identifiable, and then even the font and the typeface used is very distinctive. The use of dial side screws was a little bit controversial early on, and you can see they're used to fix not just the bezel framing the subdials, but also the dial itself. Today, it's considered to be a signature of Journe's style, and it's also universally copied. We have a dial that includes sub-seconds. Then if you look at the steel bezel that frames it, it's been mirror finished and beveled on both the inner face and the outer face. Tough to show with the camera that can't quite pick it up, but rest assured it's there. Journe makes two different types of power reserve, the type that runs backward and indicates 0 when fully wound, and then the type that works more or less conventionally and indicates a number when fully wound. So 120 hours here. But the truth is, since the very beginning of the Octa automatic caliber 1300, these movements have had a longer power reserve than 120. 120 is the chronometric power reserve. Drop dead is like 160. So when it hits 0, you want to wind it so it keeps good time. Again, it can run for another 40 or so hours, but Journe only claims power reserve equal to the chronometric or precise timekeeping power reserve. Another little note here. You can see we have a adjustment for the moon phase disc when you turn the crown in one direction, and then in the opposite direction, the flush double-digit date, that is flush disc, double-digit date, can be adjusted. Important to note that moon phase right there, it's actually a metallized sapphire disc, which is kind of cool. So nicely done, and unlike a lot of early Journe watches, this one features no dial, aging, or patina. Some people like patina, but my motto is box stock and factory whenever possible. Now, turning it all over, you can see here we have an Eleanor-made case. So Eleanor was a French case constructor who worked with Journe from his very earliest pocket watch days in the 80s. So you can see Eleanor's maker's mark right there, and then 2 French eagle head hallmarks. It also has a Swiss hallmark, so it would have been assembled ultimately in Switzerland. So you have this French-made case that's considered something of a collector's item. They were phased out in a mid-2008 when Journe bought Eleanor and moved it to Geneva, but Eleanor cases can be seen a little bit later because there was some using up of stock at the time. Hard to imagine FP Journe holding case component inventory like they were waiting for orders. That's a little bit difficult to imagine from the perspective of 2025, but it was a different time back in 2003 when this was made, certainly, and 2008 later on. Now, this wasn't exactly a 2003 watch, because another feature that was discontinued later on Journe watches is the stamping of the case with the case's year of manufacture. So if this model with the brass movement was made from 2003 to 2005, then the case itself would be stamped with the year the case was made. This can have some disparity with the actual date of manufacture and, of course, the sale date of the watch, but in general, they're fairly close. This stamping of the case year of manufacture on the case itself, that was discontinued about mid-2005. L is the reference. At Journe, they don't have complicated references. L is all you get. And then you can see these Holt head screws, a distinctive trait of Journe watchmaking, just to keep people who don't know what they're doing from going inside the watch. So the original version of the Octa was brass with rhodium-plated bridges. The rotor was always 22-karat gold with a grand orge, or sort of barleycorn-like clou de Paris. And then we have technical specs that are a little bit different too. So these early Octas, until about mid-2007, they had bidirectional winding like an ETA 2892, and later on they would have unidirectional winding. So this is in the bidirectional winding era. 3 Hertz beat rate, 5-position adjusted. It is a 30.4 millimeter diameter movement, which was quite large by the standard at the time. 3 Hertz beat rate's not all that high, but this balance makes up in chronometric qualities for its lack of beat rate by having a very, very, very large mass and then being free sprung, which allows both more precise adjustment as well as greater shock resistance. The movement has an enormous single mainspring barrel, and the mainspring reportedly over 1 meter long, and Journe was able to design the mainspring so that he wound up with a very flat torque plateau for those 120 chronometric hours. So even though it's a single large mainspring barrel, it doesn't have the surging and then ebbing timing tendencies of a lot of long power reserve watches that just have one mainspring. It is a 5-position adjustment. Journe's idea was to create an automatic watch that could run with chronometer precision. 5-position is the chronometer standard. He found with that flat torque curve of the unique mainspring that he could get chronometer-like performance. And if you've ever wondered why the rotor of these Octas isn't quite the diameter of the case back, the reason was something about the use of complication modules required the movement itself to have a displaced winding system. So something about the dial side mating area to the complication module required the winding system to be somewhat off-centered on the back. So that's sort of what's going on there. An unusual factoid, but an answer to a commonly asked question. Now, at the time, Journe watches were, to put it mildly, workman-like. So if you look here, you're going to see a bevel that is so crude that even without magnification, the milling marks from the wheel are still visible. These early watches were noted for their innovation and vision, not necessarily for being finished to de Bethune or Grubel 4C levels. But Journe has always hung his hat on innovation, and the watch was awarded. It actually won the Favorite Men's Watch Prize at the GPHG in 2023, and that was a period, the early to mid-2000s, when it seemed like Journe was cleaning up those awards on a yearly basis. So lots to love. Reach out to Team Mosso at the 1916company.com for purchase and pricing details.